Welcome, everyone, to our keynote lecture. First, we are going to have some introductory comments. First, from Dr. Jane Zaviska, Associate Dean for Research in College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. Hello, thank you so much for inviting me to say a little bit about the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences kind of perspective and values and on the TAKER program. I remember that I've been here for a little less than 20 years, and TAKER has been around almost that long. It's been really great to see the programming grow over the years, and the college has been happy to be a supporter of the program financially and otherwise over the years. When I looked at the program with the list of topics of the students presenting on, our keynote speakers' expertise, it was just really wonderful to see, because so much of the work that you're doing, it reflects not just the TAKER program, but what the TAKER program is supposed to do more broadly, which is to really invest in young scholars like yourselves in these important areas of social justice, health, environment, migration. These are really key strengths across the University of Arizona, across the college, particularly in Latin American studies, but also in Middle Eastern studies and other parts of the world. So this program is doing exactly what a college, level dean's office hopes that it will do, which is to bring together so many different disciplinary perspectives. It's also, I just wanted to mention that alongside TAKER, one of the other really important grant programs and investments of the university in your area is the Times 6 Latin American Studies Center. And I remember in the last proposal cycle, I helped to support bringing in new faculty in the areas of the human rights, migration, and health. And so, again, I can concede that those hires, those investments are leading to wonderful scholarship. So thank you so much for all the effort and energy that you're putting into these areas. I hope that this research that you're doing, that you're presenting, will not only help you to get your master's thesis, but is setting you up for whatever your next steps are, whether it's to be doing applied research in the field or going on for further doctoral education and working in public policy. I can imagine so many different kinds of teachers that you could have with the research agendas that you're doing. So I know you're here to see our speaker, not me, so I'm going to stop talking. And I think someone else will be introducing our speaker. Sure, that is. All right, thanks so much.
Dr. Kimberly Theidon is a medical anthropologist focusing on Latin America. She is the author of many articles, commissioned reports, 3 books, and an edited volume. Entre Projimos el conflicto armado interno y la política de la reconciliación en el Perú, was awarded the Latin American Studies Association 2006 Premio Iberoamericana Book Award honorable mention for outstanding book in the social sciences, published in Spanish or Portuguese. Her second book, Intimate Enemies, Violence and Reconciliation in Peru, was awarded the 2013 honorable mention from the Washington Office on Latin America Duke University Library's Book Award for Human Rights in Latin America, and the 2013 honorable mention for the Arlene Basker Prize from the Society for Medical Anthropology for research on gender and health. In her most recent book, Legacies of War, Violence, Ecologies, and Kin, Theidon considers the multiple environments in which conception, pregnancy, and childbirth unfold, reimagining harm to account for the impact of armed conflict on individual people, as well as on more than human lives, bodies, and ecologies. Her co-edited volume, Challenging Conceptions, Children Born of Wartime Rape and Sexual Exploitation, offers cutting-edge case studies on children born of wartime rape, their mothers, families, and communities, aiming to contribute to more humane policy responses and interventions. She is currently completing Theaters of War, working with former combatants in Colombia. And the title for her talk today with us is Ecologies of Justice, the Rights of Nature in Colombia. Please help me giving a warm welcome to Dr. Theidon.
I think I do need to have it. Thank you so much. And we get the PowerPoint going. I have 40 minutes and 50 slides. So as my spouse says, do the math for what? She pointed out that this probably was. Let's see what happens. I'll go through some of them quickly. Perfect. Thank you so much. So here you have it. This is one of those times where the title I sent is actually the title I have. So unprecedented, and I'm feeling pretty good about that. Oops, bad. And it's really just a foot lad you want to thank. They didn't hire me. University of saying invitation to share ideas. This is the first time I'm working through some of this. I was our Fulbright in Colombia for fall semester. And so I said, with full recognition, to also Tufts University. And then many más gracias to all my Latin American friends and colleagues whose generosity and kindness has made my research a passion project for a long time. So rivers meander, and so do projects. And this particular one meanders from sexual violence, the trigger warning for some, to forced maternity, from woes to wounded warscapes, and onto the human and more than human wages of gore. So let me begin, if I may, this meandering one afternoon in fragmentos in Bogotá, Colombia. So in early November 2019, I stood before a packed room in the recently installed gallery space Fragmentos in Bogotá. As part of the 2016 peace accords between the Colombian government and the FARC, the guerrillas had turned in some 37 tons of rifles, pistols, and grenade launchers. These weapons were subsequently melted down in the Colombian military's foundry, and some of that metal found its way to the artist Doris Caicedo. With help from women survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, each wielding a very heavy hammer, they pounded those sheets into the tiles that you see there below your feet. Now, the packed audience that afternoon included a mix of NGO representatives, human rights activists, lawyers working within the transition justice court, doctors from the Ministry of Health, journalists, and, as I would learn, an undetermined number of rape survivors. And I began my top challenging conceptions, children born of wartime rape. Scanning the audience, I had certain women who were looking at this fact intensely. There were many questions following my talk, but the questions, to my delight, ceded to a series of testimonies from several women who wanted to speak about their experiences with sexual violence and its consequences. So first we heard from Theidon, a young Afro-Colombian woman who'd been raped by a lighter-skinned member of the FARC. She lived in a small town and decided to tell no one, not her boyfriend, not her mother, what had happened. Then the waiting began. 1 month, 6 weeks, 2 months, and still she did not menstruate. She hid her swelling belly as best she could and prayed. Every day I prayed to God, please let this baby be black. Just please, God, let him be black. Well, her prayers are not answered, so she gave birth to a white baby boy. So everyone knew, and everyone gossiped until she left her small town for the city. Her son is grown now, she loves him, and he's been a source of comfort to her. Even so, she lamented the life she had not led. As an adolescent, she planned to study, choose her career. Those plans were thwarted by rape and forced maternity. Another woman, born as a result of her mother's rape, had been roped by paramilitaries. When she was lured into a field with promises of food, gnawing hunger gave way to nausea. She barely ate during her pregnancy, revulsed by her changing body. Her mother was there when she gave birth, urging her to nurse her baby, Mija, but fault in her baby possibly had. She refused, but somehow her shirt fell open as she slept, and the baby latched onto the breast and began to suckle. I can't explain it, she ever, but once that baby began to nurse, she was mine, and I couldn't help her. I loved it. And another one asked for the microphone, very much to campesina, and she held the microphone in one hand, and she had a big wad of tissue in the other, and she began sobbing, and the whole room went silent. She'd been brutally raped as an adolescent and had told no one. Do you notice a recurrent theme in the telling no one? Fearful she'd be blamed for what had happened to her. With time, her swelling abdomen gave her secret away. I knew nothing about abortions. I didn't know what to do, so I started jumping off chairs. I landed on my stomach. I jumped. I hoped I'd kill it. It was disgusting to me. Her efforts to abort failed, and she gave birth to a baby boy. She paused in an effort to stop crying, but tears continued to stream down her face. I could barely stand to look at him. He repulsed me and didn't want anything to do with him. Her mother convinced her to breastfeed the baby, but that magnified her disgust. Once again, she felt her body was being lent to reproductive labor she hated, this time to feed a baby she wished had never been born. Her son's an adult now. She's unable to have any more children as a result of the rape and the damage done. She sees them from time to time, but that gives her no comfort. Everyone's always noticed how short-tempered he is. He's so aggressive. He's really angry. I don't know what it is. He's just like that. Everyone knows he's not. Something is simply wrong with him. It must be genetic. Different women, diverse decisions. Some were chosen, most were imposed. And a diversity of outcomes. There was one point, though, that all those women could agree on. Abort the baby, birth the baby, raise the child, put the child up for adoption, love that child or hate it. No importa lo que pase, todo el mundo echa la culpa a la madre. No matter what, everyone blames the mother. So listening to the women that afternoon tree, a whole lot of members of many years that I've spent listening to similar conversations with women in Colombia. And some of those conversations taught me through the day. So this ongoing project is my effort to contribute to an interdisciplinary research agenda that can help us develop more compassionate policies regarding sexual assault survivors and the children who are born of wartime rape. And this is what I care about deeply, contribute to an explicitly feminist recognition of the human and the more than human legacies. And there you go. So, I want us to think of it then. Who and where is the reproductive subject? As it says, I hope it shows up if doesn't. This is doing weird things. Keep calm and blame the mother is what it says. But anyhow, it doesn't say that. It will probably have some other surprises. I refer to just to Google. Anything is along. So it's going to unfold probably about 4 parts, akin to concentric circles. I do want to think about reproductive environments in the plural. I want to think beyond human exceptionalism to all of our kin. Contemplate who and what is considered a casualty of war. And then, those 51 PowerPoints permitting, I want to talk about entanglements and vocabularies of repair, redress, and hope. So blame, shame, and guilt the mother. I just want to say hegemonic maternal scripts, right, are very oppressive. They're frequently very patriarchal. They are so oppressive in their normative expectations. They pathologize internal ambivalence. Eat this, no, don't eat that because it causes cancer. The same thing you were told to take more of yesterday, today. I always want us to think that these maternal scripts can be incredibly oppressive. The burden of enacting good motherhood under the best of circumstances can be challenging. I'm not looking at women who live in the best of circumstances. What about sexual violence, unwanted conception, forced maternity? Really do women have to hold up the entire sky? And I would ask this when we think about who and where is the reproductive subject. And again, I'm still right on the slides and not showing things. It's overwhelmingly female bodies, and fathers are almost absent. So think of some of the questions I care about these days. Where do we locate reproduction? Where is it occurring? Who, what, and where is the reproductive subject? How do we define reproductive violence? What does it consist of? How might we respond to the human and more than human legacies of armed conflict? And what are some vital components of multi-species justice? Now, I'm going to talk ever so quickly about this because I don't want to take too much time when I've written about it. Those of us who work on these issues work within the framework that the UN has established, which is the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. There are 10 resolutions. All of them talk about, quote, to promote a gendered perspective on women's equal and meaningful participation in peace processes, peace building, and security. My concern here is that we mainstream the gender, we take the teeth out of feminism. And so in order to get powerful countries like the United States to sign on to these resolutions, you do not mention some of the very obvious outcomes of massive sexual violence, forced maternity, botched abortions, machines to get born. You cannot even include the language of sexual reproductive rights without the fourth birth bands that refer to as right to life people. I love it. It's called right to life people. They won't allow you even to have that language. So I do want us to understand, as we focus so intensely on conflict and sexual violence against girls, note that as well, that is almost impossible for us to begin to talk about social and reproductive rights in the aftermath of this kind of violence. That language is not allowed. So, the maternal environment, what do we think it is? What is the environment that's under consideration? My neighborhood is killing me, right? Look at the toxins the shabby buildings with no heat, streets with no street lights. Part of what I'm trying to get at here is what about a political ecology of procreative labor? The material environment is a complex intergenerational set of physiological processes. It is not reduced to this, right? And part of what I'm so disturbed by is reproductive environment are frequently understood as being uterine myopia, located within each one individually, as opposed to looking at a broader array of factors that are involved in any act, conception, pregnancy, and reproduction. So, I'm interested in how the world gets under our skin and what happens when it does. So, I'm very, very influenced by the idea of distributed reproduction. And you can think that that's wider cast of characters, whether it's illegal mining, about which I have much more to say, toxic fuels, deforestation in Colombia, racism is a pandemic too. I know I loved some of the talks earlier with measure race. We should be measuring racism as a pathogen in itself. And then we have sperm. And I had to include that in there. So I'm really discussed in the reproductive sphere. Distributed reproduction and understanding the infrastructures around us, built by humans, used by humans, sometimes deemed natural, and to get to the fact that this gets under our skin. Epigenetics, DNA is not, and just, it's more like a Cliff Notes version of life. So the ways in which bodies are historical sites and processes and change across time and space, and the environment in which they live. Now, I have to say, one of my favorite terms, when someone invents something, you think, why did I think of that? Settler Epiphanies by Kim Tallbear. Do you know some of her work? She's an indigenous scholar. Or whatever really well-known book is indigenous DNA. But you call them Settler Epiphanies, and it's one of my favorite things in the world. The trope of discovery. Oh my God, did you know bodies are actually porous? No way. Oh my God, did you know that if you drink toxic water, that, as she says, the trope of discovery of something that for centuries has been done within indigenous epistemologies. I don't like the term cosmovisional. I think it falls into the belief realm, so epistemologies. So, Settler Epiphanies, I love Kim Tallbear. What do we do when relatives are harmed? What do we do? I started thinking about this stuff a lot. And I found this to be one of those stop me in my moments. Moment. It was just amazing. Do you ever Standing Rock when they were protesting the pipeline? And you had indigenous people from around the world coming to the United States with this University of Settler colonialism. This is a statement that was issued that I absolutely love. It was from the tribal chairman, Dave Archibald. And I'm just going to go down to the end. Our Mother Earth is sacred. All things evolve and work together to poison the waters, to poison the substance of life. Everything that moves must have water. How do we talk about and knowingly poison water? I've been told and taught that it's our responsibility to stand for our relatives. The ones that crawl, the ones that fly, the ones that burrow, the ones that swim, the ones that flower. Relatives that cannot speak for themselves. That will speak for them. We have to speak for those who are not here, our ancestors, for those children who are not yet here. Our ancestors who left sacred sites for us, we must speak for them. Children who are not born yet, but will live without water. This idea of relatives and of reconfiguring kin so far outside of patriarchal property law understandings of kin and their lineage, I think will return to indigenous epistemology. It gives us so many tools to begin to think about other ways of understanding who we are in this world, right? We share this planet. I think that all of us know. Do we have climate change deniers about who might throw water? Can't. I would. But that's because you're still. But my point is, the planet has pretty much reached critical mass on humans and our exceptionalism, apex of all creation, and the damage that we have done to the planet and the species around us. So how you left kin seems to be one of the things everyone was thinking about. Came up with some of the talks today, right? Like those who fly, those who swim, right? Those that we consider inanimate objects. I always get people to rethink inanimate objects. When you walk into your house, do you have soft rocks on the table that call you over to touch them because it calms you down? Remember the stress rocks people review? That inanimate object seems to calm us down when we touch it. So really to rethink the animate and the inanimate in the world. And that's where, if we have time, we can talk about querying ecology, because I'm in this query pre-material defense. So this is one of those pieces that I had not read until 4 years ago. Where was I? This is one of those pieces where you think, good Lord, look at this man. 1972. The unthinkable becomes thinkable. This is one of those extraordinary pieces. Should trees have legal standing? And let me say, have you read the Oak story? Elliot. This guy, he appears in Nova Story as a fiction character. He was laughed off the stage when he started talking about whether or not trees and other natural things should have rights. And I love this part. It's this note of the unthinkable I wish to dwell upon for a moment. Throughout legal history, each successive extension of rights to some new entity has been theretofore a bit unthinkable. We are inclined to suppose the rightlessness of rightless things to be a decree of nature, not a legal convention acting in support of some status quo. Women voting? African American former slaves are people, not property? Think about the fact that it was unthinkable until it happened, and it probably happened not because the powerful decided to feel generous, but because people organized and demand better lives for themselves. We saw some of that also in some of the earlier papers. So should trees have legal standing? I don't think he gets laughed at anymore. He's cited by everybody in the environmental humanities. So let's turn to Colombia. And an unprecedented ruling, T622, which was implemented in 2017, that declared the Atrato River, whom many in the communities with which I would consider Faith Kim, the Atrato River is a legal entity and as such is subject to the rights that implicate its protection, conservation, maintenance, and in this specific case, restoration. So both the Colombian Constitutional Court and the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, have been increasingly invoking the rights of nature. So what are these? According to the rights, and these take many different forms, unit modes of recognition. They've existed at municipality levels in various parts of the United States for probably the last 2 decades. But the real rights revolution around the rights of nature we can date to about 2017. The Wanagui River, New Zealand, Australia, Colombia, etc., began to pick up on the rights of nature. A doctrine, an ecosystem is entitled to legal personhood status and as such has the right to defend itself in a court of law against harms, including environmental degradation caused by a specific development project. I won't read all the rest there. But as a subject of rights, it has the right to legal representation, frequently as a guardianship model, as we will see, in Colombia. But the idea that nature is no longer just a new backdrop for human life, no longer just a collateral damage when bombs go and depleted uranium leaks into the earth, that nature, as we can perhaps discuss it, and ecosystems are also casualties of war, frequently in a slower falling climate. Let's talk more about that. Do you all read Rob Dixon's Slow Violence? A book about which I am obsessed. I think it's one of the best books. It's one of those where you read, did you feel this way? It gives you a new vocabulary to describe the world in which we live. Foundational tests of the environment and humanities. And he talks about slow violence, that high that uranium leaching into the soil can take a century. Rising river. Leading to us so they're after this current third and decade. And also gets the hotter, these kinds of things. There's a slow violence. It was the harder to create a moving narrative around that. I think it's changing human sense about the step up because we're not going to live to see that. I thought real prophet right now. As we move through my work today, I really want to acknowledge how important his work is and that there's also people who experience the climate change and planetary devastation in real time. It's not slow, it's really fast. It's only slow if you live at a very privileged distance from seeing the kinds of changes that people constantly tell me about. When they talk about the Atrato, we used to be able to see to the bottom of the river and see the fish. You can't even see your hand in the water in your blood. Okay. For naturalization, Salinger is one of my favorite people in the whole world who passed away. Those of you who know her, she passed away 2 years ago. And her work on gender violence and human rights is the canon of legal antwork. And one of her ideas was vernacularization. I think it really pertains to the rights of nature. She was talking about human rights, but she was interested in how universalistic rights get appropriated, reworked into local understandings of justice, values, and practice. So I'm really interested in moving beyond the rights of nature and the myriad modes of recognition, the kinds of models that are put into place for environmental governance, how it sets down in place. And a place where we don't have years to look at it, but certainly they just celebrated the 5th anniversary of the T622, the ruling of the Atrato. So we got some time deck to begin to understand what's happened. And this was unprecedented in Colombia. And you now have, as I said, subsequently, other rights of nation to come back, both from the court, but also from the jurisdictions that help us. Okay, so let's look at Colombia and biocultural rights. The ruling that established that the Atrato is a legal entity, T622, established legal personage for the river, a casualty, sim victim, of the armed conflict, a subject, as I mentioned, with the rights to protection, conservation, restoration, and maintenance, and in their decision, the court explicitly crafted a new theory of biocultural rights, derechos bioculturales, based on the profound unity between nature and the human species. All right? So this was part of the rationale for why they established it. So let's go on there. I've been under for the past fall semester because I've worked in this particular region on river a very long time. And when I first started, it was a very challenging time. It was on paramilitary, it was displacing everybody. So lots of bombs and villages being burned. The violence takes different forms now. It has not stopped. So, again, T622, I'm not going to read all of this, but it's up there to take a look. And there's a move, really, for the environmental humanities. And we saw, if you were here from Mariela's talk, Mariela Boloncedo. Mariela? Mariela Permon. Her talk was just absolutely brilliant. And the blue humanities, how do we get the humanity? But getting people that care about climate change. Not everybody gets a fire in their belly over carbon emission. Meant to really rock their world. But maybe a poem, maybe a beautiful flower, maybe a whale. Megafauna, they're charismatic candabears. Candabears are huge, very, very large, on the adorable creatures that gets people to donate money. My point, right? But the blue humanities, how do we bring the art and the humanities in to getting people to think differently and reconstruct the narratives to tell ourselves about environment and environmental change? And so Stacey Alamo has written a lot about the exposure, talks about the blue humanities and ecological truths. Yeah. And did other derechos or something recognize an indigenous and African communities considered the river an ancestor, spiritual being. On the last out, and it established a collaborative governance model about which I can say more, and the appointment of river guardians. I'm really interested in the ontological premises. I'll get to that in a moment. But what you do get is a commission, so you have a party that represents the Colombian state, the environmental ministry. You have a technical advisory team comprised of people from WWF, but also from some of the local universities, and you have 14 river guardians. Okay? And the river guardians were elected by the 7 primary organizations that represent Afro-Colombian and in fact, FARC and 16. And each group nominated 2 people to serve as river guardians who will speak for the river. And each of those pairs involves a man and woman because there was concerns about gender. There are other river guardians, and I had the pleasure of speaking with a number of them when I was in Colombia. What's like? Some be able to tell. Let me see. Oh, not yet. And one of the things that I will say is they have an action plan. So this is 2017, they get this, 2019, they come out with a plan to decontaminate. When I said discontaminate, I have a feeling that is not a word. The Atrato. Now, there's a whole series of things to do. Sustainable food sovereignty, and ambient, governance ambiental. But there's one thing I want to draw in on here. I use drill as unintended. one of the key issues, and it wasn't that tough, is to formulate, I'm quoting, formulate and implement an action plan to neutralize and definitively eradicate illegal mining in the Atrato and its tributaries in Choco. Yeah. I'll come back to the. Now, I mentioned that in each of these overlays, the ontological permit is one. Why is it that this entity has rights? Is it our duty to the future? Is it that we can't live without it because we run out of water and die? Is it because it's sacred in its own right, whether or not it's of use to human beings? If you read the language of the sentence, Symposium 622, I am very disturbed because it partakes of a wider othering in Colombia. I can say more about later if you want. In Colombia, territories, everything is not Bogota. Like, yes or no? If it's not Bogota, it's a territory. And in the territories, like folks who drink coffee at Centro Andino are not living. So the othering, so for all the programs you have in Enfoque Diferencial, so whenever it's not a straight, white, able-bodied, educated male, they get an Enfoque Diferencial. Either because they're women, because they're gay, because they lost a leg, whatever, okay? So it's very interesting to understand there was the unmarked human who lived in Bogota, and that's called the Centro Andino. And then there's territorials and all those other people. So it's to flip to language on this. Yeah, there you go. It's very disturbing. They, Afro-Colombians and Indigenous people, have a special relationship with nature. They think the river was safe. They think the river cuts in the mail. They think this. Have you read Evans Pritchard? Who in their anthropoclass read E.T. Evans Pritchard? It's the Evans Pritchard moment. What does Evans Pritchard decide about witchcraft oracles and his under? Do you remember? The best part of the book are the appendices where he puts all the stuff that doesn't fit. Remember, Rick? If you've not read the book, read the book. And he was at the height of reason is the measure of man, was the rationality debates. Can the primitives reason as we do? No, they're not from the loaves. But yes, they can reason like we do. They just get it wrong, which is basically Evans Pritchard. But the interesting thing, the back of it in the appendices is where he puts all the stuff that doesn't fit. He actually saw witches, but didn't want to be accused if they need it. So to me, appendices is not likely. If you read through the language of the sentence, the ontological premise is they have a special relationship. They live in the territories that we clearly don't. Whoever that we, the people, like people live without, don't. It reinstantiates some binaries that are deeply problematic. It falls into the mystical, ecological Indian kind of trope. And if only they have a special relationship with the planet and all the other creatures, well, then I think we are stunk, right? So really you see the limits of liberal tolerance. It reminds me, did you ever study those old repugnancy clauses in colonial legal orders? Let them carry on, be they not repugnant to the reasonable man. It reminds me a bit of that. So it smacks of some really problematic things that came up in some of the earlier talks about ecolonialism, something of that sort. All right. Now, onward, as I march to my flights here. Human rights defenders. Who bears the burden of saving the planet for all of us who do not have special voices? Right. Latin American countries recorded the highest number of killings of human rights defenders. Colombia occupies the first place, right? And these are just the ones you care about. The ones that actually end up in some kind of homicide register. What am I doing? Oh, we end up in some kind of homicide register as opposed to an unknown indigenous person who lives way out on that tributary and just got bumped off. So the statistics under-report with simplicity from authorities. More I could say about that if you'd like. But there is a systematic targeting of human rights defenders, social leaders, and you cannot see this either. Google has done me wrong. What this is a really beautiful quotation. That area zero is from the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment. It talks about human rights defenders die every single year. They live with threats. They live with pamphlets under the door, internet interference, people watching them down the streets, They live with constant zozobra, anxiety and threat. So the dangerous activism. You had Julia Silver come in. Yeah, dangerous feminism. So Colombia. Latin America is the most dangerous region in the world for environmental and land defenders, with 60% of all murders in 2021. In particular, Colombia has been among the top 3 countries with the most murders since at least 2013. Well, you can read this. There. Season. The first one game over COVID, as is pretty much 97% of the folks that I know. So, let's think a little bit about Chocó. The Atrato rule, all the way through Chocó. It's where I spent fall semester, as I said, traveling the Atrato up and down, visiting communities. I wanted to understand how the ruling's been actualized and implemented. Let's look at the demographics. And I get around to translate this one, but it doesn't matter because I'm a Latin American Studies program. It makes me very happy. What is the population demographics by race in Chocó? So mestizos y blancos, 5, we can see that. Afro-Colombianos, 82%, let's leave it rounded off. And indigenous are 12. So hold on to what I just showed me about the demographics who live along the Atrato River. And there's the abundance of Chocó. The only department in Colombia with coastline on the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, the only department bordering Panama. It's home to the ecoregion that probably has the highest rainfall on the planet. I'm sure it does. It's known globally for its rich biodiversity. In other words, Chocó is wealthy. This is a wealthy region of the country. It's also the poorest province of the country. If you talk about those 82 and 12% of the people who live there. Now, the extractive logics of settler colonialism, slavery, and unbridled capitalism, that juxtaposition is striking. When people talk about how poor Chocó is, they're talking about the people who live there, not the region. Or there's gold, there's oil, and there's lumber. I'll come around to some of this. So let's see if you have read those writings either. I don't know what happened. Let's go over the Atrato. The Atrato is one of the longest rivers in Colombia, arguably the most polluted. Its winding pathway begins very wide in the Western Andean mountain range, making a steep 416-mile descent into the Gulf of Urabá and ultimately out into the sea. That sinuous path connects different beings, from blades of grass to quiet birds, from trachemas medimiturlas to humanitarians, from paramilitaries to guerrillas to displaced civilians. Stretches of the river have been dredged, contaminated by the large-scale mining, I'll show you more, deforested by illegal logging activities, while other stretches have been burned out and bombed by the various armed actors for whom the land and the river have value. The inhabitants, not so much. Right? Cheap labor at best, surplus humans at worst. So who governs the Atrato? Or militaries. This pause, theoretical lower growth count gets by 40 minutes. But I'm wrapping this time. When you get here, I'm going to take photos. My students always say, "Do you have photos, Professor Time?" No. You take photos of pretty much anyone I talk to or anywhere I go. Forward comebacks, Joe on their photo on the front of my book. I was told by los Ecologies that if you are using your cell phone to take you photos, they'll just take your phone from you, so you don't do it. The only one that's admired these, which I kind of, why everyone was eating fried fish. So do you see, who governs here? This is the mouth of the Atrato, and just kind of look home over the Gulf of Urabá, and you enter the Atrato River. The Avondalians is there, Tenisa de Colombia. Their graffiti is everywhere. When Leir was arrested in 21, extradited, he was just charged here in the United States. They were able to block all transportation on the river. They were able to turn off the internet and cell phones. These are people who are very well located and control the river and everything that goes up and down it. They are involved, not exclusively, because there are also other actors, but they are involved in illegal mining, drug trafficking, and coca cultivation. Parenthetically, I was stunned when people were telling this was not a coca growing region. I've been going there for 22 years. It is now. The deforestation and the planning, and the other just absolutely perverse part of this is what they've now that they're remining. There was a whole program to get rid of landmines, right? It was part of the sort of service community work the FARC ex-combats are supposed to do. They are now remining the area so that people can't get in to the coca fields and say or do anything about it because they'll be bombed or exploded, And they talked a lot about confinement. And it's not a term we give enough thought to in legal realms. People are not allowed to move. You are not allowed to go back to your land, which may have deep spiritual connections for you, or on a purely pragmatic level, that's where you have food. Right? So people are confined at different points of the day, are not allowed to leave. And then the internet, we can talk more about that. They have the power to just shut off the internet. They just turn it off. And you could be in the midst of a story to teach by a zoo. Suddenly we just have no internet, and then now you have the cell phones. They just turn them off. So, a pretty powerful group. Okay. This is the Rio Atrato, right? That sacred river, Brooklyn. That's the Atrato. People even say it's a botadero for many things. They also talk about a Rio Atrato as in cementerio because there were so many bodies dumped by the armed actors. Every time you approach any kind of town along the Atrato, this is what you see, is mounds of garbage. Much of it's plastic because there's no potable water in most of these communities. So if you want to not get, diarrhea, and you can buy a bottle of water, and therefore that ends up over there in the pile. There's no routine collection of garbage at all. This is Rio Sucio, where I've spent a lot of time over the years. There was a flooding crisis 12 years ago. I don't know what the time frame for crisis is, but 12 years is a long one. This is how folks live. It's 12 years later, this is the situation. You see those planks? Yeah. They are suspended about this high off the ground, and that's what you walk on. Because underneath is raw sewage everywhere. It's under the houses, it's under this. And if you're lucky, you get like 8-inch wide outlet. And if you're not, it's 5 inches, and you're balancing a flung because falling into the raw sewage is a rather horrifying idea. Now, this is not state abandonment. State indifference is what it is, because the state's there's soldiers everywhere. Say more about them maybe later. Right? No sewage system. You see the way. Because you wash in the river, you bathe in the river, you dump all your garbage in the river, you defecate and urinate in the river. The river is also laden with mercury and cyanide. More about that. Okay, this is Sucio. These are the wooden planks. And they're just everywhere. There is raw sewage because there's no place else to put it. Further up, because I don't have time, but I do want to emphasize the diversity of settlements along the river. There's Rio Sucio and then there's Quito. Quito is the capital city. That is the seat of the illegal mining. But of course, rivers run. And so everything that gets dumped into the river up high in Quito gets washed all the way down. And again, these are stock photos. What do you call those? Are retroexcavadores. What do you call them in English? The things with the big jaws. What are those called? What are they? Banco, thank you. They call them dragones, which is so perfect. Dragons spewing fumes, right? And I don't know, but retroexcavadores. But parenthetically again, going off time. If I could have taken a photo a little further up here, there's a place where the river forks. It's about a body of land. And up above that is where the ELN and the AGC are still finding it out. Now, there is a military base right there. And from the military base, which you can see from the boardwalk in Quito, they can certainly see over the other side of the river, we've got all these illegal mines. And you've got all these dragones working. Nobody sees anything. I feel so every year I've come, is what people always tell you. You need to know how to live here. You see nothing. You hear nothing. You say nothing. So we can blame las fuerzas públicas because the complicity, and if you can ask me more about how they coordinate with the drug traffickers and whatnot. But my point here is not just to blame the soldiers. But I have photos of the guys at all the military checkpoints. They're usually about 18 or 19 years old, right? They're just kids. And what are they supposed to do? You go get those paramilitaries over there that are organized like an army with AK-47s. I feel so revivido, so we just don't see much in anything. So I feel for them. Because they won't just kill them, look how they're families. Revista Semana, which confirmed what some of my colleagues at the University of Antioquia at Medellin, they did a study. They started measuring the sedimentation and the water and the fish. And about the inordinate, and they did it up and down the river because rivers move in sediment. And at the end of showing me all of their statistics on the work here, I asked this team of 3 people, would you eat any fish that came out of the water? No way. So just this last week in Revista Semana, Colombia is el tercer país del mundo con más contamina con mercurio. Right? There's just mercury because I never knew how you had to mine gold because I've never done it. But you have to use mercury to get the sedimentation to fall off the gold. So you produce mercury. Then with those big dragones, when they start dredging up, they dredge up all the sedimentation, which releases all the mercury into the water again. Now, who are our environmental defenders? Throughout Latin America, many of them, Afro-Colombian and Indigenous suddenly. And I think that has something to do, again, with why they are killed in such numbers. Right? Certain deaths and lives seem to count for less at a national level. I think there would be outrage if this were happening to people in Bogotá, but this happens in the territorios, to those people with a special relationship. Now, can you read that, Lilia? I'm interested in thinking that when violences accumulate and what it means to live in the saturation point of racism and ethnic discrimination, sexism, physical and mental assaults, threats via cell phones, internet pamphlets, all of these women receive threats all the time. Poverty, extreme poverty, armed actors, and then the contamination associated with the armed conflict and the extractive industries. And deforestation, I don't have an environmental background. I'm trying to get up to speed. Deforestation and the devastation of it. And so I know all that dirt just ends up in the river. It also, I love the work on trees. They have trees communicate. Seasons to Mart, if you've been reading New Science of Trees and the ways they communicate. The other World Wide Web, as they call it. And also, when you have big trees, they soften the blow of that rain. As I just told you, one of the 2 rainiest places in the world. They shelter the younger trees. They shelter the earth. You deforest, and this is what you see, right? Is this kind of absolute devastation. And there's more forms of violence that people are putting up with. Climate change, mega projects and multinationals, private security forces, state complicity, and as they tell me over and over, our abundance is our curse. So extractive logics all the way around, right down to this was a zone where they would recruit paramilitaries, right? It was an exportation zone of paramilitaries, which plays in a whole lot of stereotypes, profoundly racist stereotypes about Black men in Colombia being naturally more violent, naturally more savage. So why do we need an explicitly feminist intersectional environmental agenda? Not only to get beyond uterine myopia and blaming women for everything that happens to every baby born, who washes the clothes and dishes of the children? This is the part where you participate. Who washes the clothes and dishes of the children? The women. Who becomes pregnant, gestates, gives birth to babies? Women. Who cares? There's kind of a leitmotif thing here. Who cares for the children with chronic skin infection? Who, due to their mere genders, exposed to forms of SV and GBV? And who's less likely to have former land titles? Land everywhere is a feminist issue, and it certainly is in Colombia. Right? This is why we need to, it's not enough to just say, we want women there because gender matters, where gender defaults back to women and it's very binary and excludes any other genders other than young female. But aside from that, it also matters because We need to be thinking about the kinds of harms that are done and don't stop when supposedly the wars are over. So, I have now become happily obsessed with the environment humanities. I'm almost done. How am I doing? This is slide 10 minutes. Oh, I'm 43. This is very good. Okay. So the environmental humanities, as I mentioned, Rob Nixon's Slow Violence, which if you haven't read it, I swear to you, you will go wild for that book. I've underlined it so much I have to remember we sell online and post-it notes everywhere. It's a really extraordinary book. And one of the things he asks us again, Ecologies is the collateral. Who and what counts as a war casualty? After official victory's been declared, how do we track the persistence of unofficial hostilities in the cellular domain? The disorderly and attritional lethality that moves through the bone, the tissue, and blood of combatants and non-combatants alike, moving through the living body of the earth itself. Where do we look for this stuff, right? Where, again, with that distributed reproduction, all these different actors that play a role. So, I think I have time to do a little bit. I thought, it's one of those times, people always say amazing things to me, and this is one that I thought I should just read to you. When I first started doing my work in Peru, way back in the days when I was a grad student, boom, people would tell me things and I just didn't get it. I always say I was a very slow anthropologist. I read back some of those field notes and down, bam. Let me just read this to you. It's about wounded warscapes, and it's a conversation I had with a woman that really got me thinking about these things. So on the 2-lane highway that runs between Atrato and Turbo, evangelical churches vie for space with the motels that rent by the hour, car repair shops, open-air markets, banana fields, and innumerable small family stores. Their proprietors hose down the dusted plastic chairs at dawn and set them out front to entice passerbys, seeking some shade while waiting for the next bus or perhaps just some small talk. I had jumped off the bus a few minutes earlier outside of Atrato, and I was trying to get my bearings. I was looking for the home of a pastor, evangelical, who had once been a fearsome paramilitary. And as vocation would have it, he was out preaching. He wasn't home. So the walk back to the main street was sweaty, and that plastic chair in the shade was very enticing. I shooed away a few scraggly chickens, and I eagerly bit the corner off of a flimsy plastic bag of water. Now, the owner was an older woman who'd lived in that small wooden house for many years. Yamila lived alone, and I became a regular customer. She enjoyed telling me stories, although she always stopped if anyone else was within hearing range. She had survived some of the most violent years in the region, violence that had displaced many peasants who ran for their lives. So one afternoon, she gestured toward the hills and told me about La Curva del Diablo. It lay at the crest of the hill on a dirt path that was used to transport goods inland as well as to fleet when the paramilitaries arrived with chainsaws. Once the Armadas realized people were attempting to escape, they positioned a few armed men at the Curva del Diablo with orders to kill anyone they encountered or to dump the bodies beside the road. Those bodies accumulated and loved ones were forbidden to bury the dead. Blood seeped deep into the soil. Even now, Yamil added, that place is not right. People try to take their goods inland, they've packed up their purses, but the horses stop, and they tremble when they reach the Curva del Diablo. They refuse to pass through. The orders have to whip them. The horses are terrified. Of course, it's because the land remembers. I've had so many conversations on that, right? Get it? When people were telling me about mountain gods that were angry. Oh my God. What it meant to sleep. I had 5 minutes where it meant to sleep in those caves on the bones of ancestors, that the witches, people were talking on something. I don't know, everyone must let that know. But they were talking about a world that had changed. The sun shone a different color. Birds flew a different way. People were talking, I didn't get it. It was 3 years ago. I go back to my field notes and why didn't we get the gods were angry, the mountains turned their back on them because they couldn't take up their offerings all the time. The ways in which, when we start to think about reconciliation also, is what are people reconciling with? Not just food, but with what? I think this is my last one. I am very, very caught up with the work of Ashley Consolo, but also a guy named Glenn Albrecht. So Ashley talks about ecological grief. So she works with First Nation people of Canada. People talk, they are grieving in real time that species don't exist anymore and the forests aren't the way they used to be before. People are experiencing this and there's a deep sense of mourning. And if you think about it, we do not have rituals of mournization. We don't, I've never seen one, maybe we will think of some. Albrecht talks about solastalgia, the distress caused by environmental change and devastation. And again, when we reconfigure kin, it's also the loss of kin. So I will end here. I'm interested then in those entangled claims of kindness, relationships that are severed and call out for care and repair. From wounds to warscapes, traveling the sinuous path of the Atrato taught to claim how war is under the skin and into the world up around us. And it's my hope that if we can braid together the human and more than human legacies of war, maybe we open the possibility for a politics of accountability and coexistence that's not grounded in an anthropocentric human rights framework and contributes to a new vocabulary of harm, reparation, and hope. So I'm there. And I definitely welcome questions as I was deliberately thinking this through as I studied Rachel. Here for questions.
We're a little bit over time, but let's take 10 minutes for questions. We'd really love to ask questions this week.
Things I should speak about.
Yeah. I look at it, yeah. After that, this so much that was burned. Excellent. I wanted to ask you about, the whole thing is displacement, and we know that a lot of people come to Triple and be displaced for the past years or so. There is the whole thing of African palm as well. I don't know how displacement also changes the communities. You be bullied or, I'd see the big flake when you bullet that. How does it go from that?
That's a wonderful question. Because when I look at the river, and people tell me how important it is to life, and and everybody dumps every single thing in it. There were not river guardians. That was imported from the New Zealand model. I have more I can say about that if you're interested. But there were practices of care. There were places that you can't fish more of those fish. There won't be enough. You don't cut more enough trees than what you... There were communal mechanisms of regulating the use and the interactions with what we would call nature. Those are massively disrupted. I mean, most of the people who live in Rio Sucio have been displaced for 20 years. And this issue of confinement, which I think is really important, and I'm just now thinking more about it, they aren't allowed to go back, right? The armed groups tell them you can't go back if you're staying here in the city. We can keep an eye on all of you, right? So there is this longing. For some people, that land had been in their families forever. So there is some of that. I do think it causes people to lose communal ties and have to rebuild them, to find themselves living jungled up peasants and indigenous folks and Afro-Colombians who may have very different agendas about what happens with the river and everything else. So I don't know if this is a good answer to your question. Not everybody dreams of always going back, but they do be able to move freely about and not have to ask for permission and not to have it be so dangerous, right? So that's part of what I see. But the politics of displacing people as part of the violence was absolutely amazing. Chase them off. They used to starve people out, right? They would inevitably displace people, think of 20 years back, just as they were getting ready to. They'd harvest everything, burn it all down, starve people out. But now it's a different kind of violence. I think, Quibdó, for God's sakes, I didn't say this about Quibdó. Quibdó, you don't go out after 6, the capital city that I showed you. There's a toque de queda. It's informal, but the armed groups on WhatsApp, Facebook have said anyone out after 6 was seen as a party to the conflict, and we assume no responsibility if we shoot you. Again, demobilizing people, but not in that sense, but really confining, saying can't move. Going up and down river is a part of life. Natalia Quinceno, do you know Natalia Quinceno, has a beautiful book about Afro-Colombian communities. And embarcarse is such a part of culture. It's going up and down river from the little tiny baby. You're going up and down river on the boats, moving up and down. Families are extended. When you can't move, that is a huge affront. And it also affects what people can eat and everything. I mean, that's what I see. So thank you. And I need you more with this idea of confinement. Because people don't use that word, but that's what I think we would call it. Yeah.
Miss, sorry, I wasn't sure if it was more Yasidan. I was wondering if maybe you can sort of get it this through your field work, but taking up Chocolo, I like this being with the BINETs, right? These like the BINETs, like municipalities that are identified as places where they're going to do these grassroots development projects, areas affected by cultism through, what they are. And sort of for me, one of the big problems with the whole framework, besides that it ended up being very top down, is that it's like development for post-conflict in municipalities that are post-conflict. But I'm wondering, like, if you have a sense of what people at Chocolas, I've never done fieldwork at Chocol, but what they think of it as, like, are they engaging in this? Are they just rejecting it as just sort of being listened for? Are they hopeful about it? Anything like that?
I mean, there's more hope now that Petro and Latkis are in office. But when I'm talking about the ontological premises, I just want to go back a little bit. This was a form of judicial activism, I have to say. Theidon, lawyers from Bogota who elaborated the sentence. They consulted along the river with people. They picked up some very folklorized understandings, I have to say. It reads like some bad anthropology from the 40s. The timeless indigenous bull, that kind of stuff. Most people 5 years out have never heard of the sentence. They have no idea what you're talking about. The what? The river? And those images I showed you, I don't know if this is answering your question. I'm getting around. I'm taking a sinuous path. I like to be under, just like the river. But, I showed you those rivers of Rios, the photos of Rio Sucio. Look how people live. But now the river's sacred and has rights that you don't have. I mean, this is probably what we have to think. If we're going to build an environmental response on the backs of the most marginalized people of these countries, that's the problem. Do people have hope? Do they want, if you're going to bring some resources that somehow can be useful, they probably are pretty much interested, even if they're not going to do any of the stuff that you ever said they were supposed to do with them. When people do talk about the sentence, is anything that would just get the state's attention to do something here about the illegal mining, about the drug trafficking, about all the timber that goes down. So that's what I feel is that it's not a no to intervention, but they would like to have a greater say about what happens. That makes me out. And it is, and then these talk, well, because to live in it about with that. The Bogotá centrismo in Colombia is a huge problem because everyone lives in authority except for those. It's part of a logic that is deeply flawed, it seems to me. Yeah. Gabriel.
I have a question, and it's about the role of gender. There's all Francia Marquez, we have an LDP, we have Federal. How do you see women carving out a new role for themselves in this kind of contemporary political period? Obviously, men had their chance. They seem to do a very good job in Colombia. Women were always on the back of it. I'm from Bogota. There's at least none of that. I'm immigrated to the U.S. because of conflict. It's wide-reaching and extensive. And at least for me, I've always seen the woman, the family, be the ones that have to navigate whole lives. And so, I guess now, what are women doing?
Oof. I won't talk about it. I'll talk about Chocó because I don't think I can make a totalizing statement. I mean, I've known some of these women activists for 22 years, and some have been killed, but many have not. Many have buried husbands and multiple sons. Frequently, they started soup kitchens that have now turned into restaurants. They are very entrepreneurial in the way in which they go about things. The women have always been there, always holding a whole lot of this together. That is not to say that gender-based violence doesn't fall on the men. The forced recruitment and the homicide rates in Quibdó, that's on men. They are killed every single week. I don't have a response to you, but I'll tell you what the women want. Because I had asked, what can we do here? We can't, make the paramilitaries go. What do you recycling? That is a great leverage. They want a recycling project. I work at Tufts. We've got this huge environmental project center. I think we can help them with that. They're not confronting armed actors. They're just trying to clean this river up. And I think that's something that's feasible in the face of all that's organized against them in this incredibly conflictive context. So the women are still organized. They're still trying to get better health care. I mean, we were talking a little bit about this earlier today with Susan. And one of the things that my students say, don't you get so depressed working in Colombia? I would be very indulgent for me to get depressed when the people I work with are still thinking, maybe we can get better school here. 22 years after, you're still thinking many of better school here. Or that maybe you can start, they'll stop killing people. I don't like the term resilience. I don't like it, and I'll tell you why. I don't want to celebrate people being able to deal with grinding poverty for 400 years. You go, Jim, ain't that great? We're so resilient. But people's tenacity for life is something I find extraordinary. Some of the religious, there's a lot of, and the other version, the Diocese of Apartado y Quito are fascinating. These are two much more activist, much more progressive. It's liberation theology. They're steeped in it, and La Cretianos, no. But what women are doing is kind of what they've always been doing, try to organize, trying to get the violence to subside, trying to figure out how to keep people fed. I mean, a lot of the dailiness of war falls on women's shoulders. We all know that. Their protagonism just doesn't take the same form sometimes as men. It becomes less visible somehow. And certainly, rituals of death, rituals of mourning. I mean, women in most cultures are very much charged with that. And yeah, there are healers, female healers. So it's been everything. And there is certainly, I'll conclude with this, some excitement about Francia Marquez. There is expectations. Oh my God, I hope it goes well, because there are such expectations that she is going to do something. She won't forget Chocó. She won't forget us. And I just hope that things become better for people. In this region, you just hope it gets better for people. Truly. Yeah. Last comment? Yeah.
The rules were good that our opponent can fit, so put it in that. As in, it's just on. We will cover on the water by the US, the verticals. Nice. So here, let's render source of that just be not our country. Find he's on liberal challenge in terms of a reparation for it. The road up. In this specific case, the US perpetrated in destroying Scotsablau. Is there any kind of similar sentiment in Chocó or Colombia in general in terms of levying against a specific actor or set of actors, or is that?
Oh, God. First of all, the questions are wonderful. There are people organizing in Vietnam about Agent Orange because, you still got birth defects. That's why I say what counts as a war casualty. All these decades later, people are still giving birth to babies that have deformations, and our vets who always come back with whatever the latest poison was that they used. So there are some people organizing around reparations for Agent Orange. Now, here is part of the challenge. This is my own. I asked everybody who owns the illegal mining operations. So there. Nobody knows. There is one legal entity up in Carmen de Atrato, and everyone will talk about it, and the Canadians own it. Nobody. Seriously, I asked everybody that could ask. Nobody knows. They don't know the name of the companies. They don't know the name of the owners. Every time there's an operativo by the military, you come through and get rid of those dragones, they disappear and no one can find them. So state complicity is part of the problem. And one person told me, I think 70% of the mines are owned by the United States. If I could trace that down and scream it from the rooftops, I would. I can't prove it. Because seriously, it is totally maddening. It's how the illegality works. Nobody. I was asking local authorities, go ahead and whisper. I won't repeat it if people are terrified to talk. Nobody knows. So, should the U.S. be held responsible for a lot of things that's done around the world? Yes. And we know how the politics of accountability work. Great. So,
Some people talk about ecocide
as a crime.
but I really appreciate your question.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the question.
Perfect. We did it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Theidon, for traveling all the way to the University of Arizona and giving such an amazing keynote lecture. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Yeah, we did too. Great. So I would like to invite everybody to our reception. We have some goodies to eat and drink. So, yeah, hang around for a little bit longer and we can ask Dr. Theidon some more questions.